It's almost here. The 7th annual Annapolis Film Festival opens on Thursday, March 21st in Annapolis and rolls on for 4 solid days. This year, the festival features more than 80 films along with dozens of panels, Q&A sessions, and yes, my favorite, the parties. Tickets and passes are available at AnnapolisFilmFestival.com, but right now we're diving in a little bit deeper and speaking with the faces behind the films, directors, producers, and actors. You want some insight to what you don't usually get? Well, here you go. Hey, joining us today, and we're going to be talking about the Annapolis Film Festival again, and one of the really cool movies that I want to see, which is sort of eye-opening when I saw the synopsis, was General Magic. And just the synopsis says, from the first smartphones to touchscreens, eBay to emojis, the tech that dominates our lives were born at a startup nobody's ever heard of, called General Magic. And it's a tale of how great vision, grave betrayal, and epic failure changed the world. And joining us today is Tom Hershenson, who worked with General Magic, and I believe you were the head of PR at one point.
I was the head of PR at one point. I started as kind of the second banana on the PR team, and then I rose to become banana number one.
Banana number one. Life goals. Life goals, for sure. You hear about tech companies, you hear, okay, Microsoft, and you've got Bill Gates in the garage, and you've got Steve Jobs and Wozniak and everything else here like this, but this actually sort of predated that, or was running under the radar back then.
Well, General Magic has a different kind of birth story than most companies in Silicon Valley. It was never really a traditional startup in terms of guys in the garage. It was spun out of Apple. The founder of General Magic was a guy named Mark Peratt, and he, in the mid to late 80s, was what we would call a futurist. I mean, he was a guy who was at a think tank thinking very deeply about where technology was going to go. He got hired by Apple, and he persuaded John Sculley, who was the CEO of Apple at the time, to set up an independent company that would try to make the first, what we would now call, a smartphone. So it was well-funded and well-stocked with just wonderfully talented people from day one, and it wasn't a bunch of guys, trying to bootstrap something. It really had a long runway to take off in terms of people and resources.
Where did this all fit in? And I remember I tend to be on the tech wave, and I remember I had a Palm Pilot at one point. And this predates that, or is this about that time?
It's about that time. It's General Magic, if I'm remembering correctly, and I turned 50 in 2 weeks, so my memory is as sharp as ever. Ha ha. It was formally spun out in about 1992 or maybe 1993. And the Palm Pilot, if I recall, kind of came on the scene maybe 93 or 94. And the big difference was, we always positioned ourselves as making something that was centered around communications, whereas the Palm Pilot and the Newton and other similar devices were really tracking information. The acronym used back then was Personal Information Manager, or PIM, whereas we talked about being a personal communicator and, really having kind of a different center of gravity in terms of what we were trying to do. But we're all competitors, all contemporaries, Newton, Palm Pilot, and there were a slew of other devices that are on the trash heap of tech history.
Now, you mentioned the Newton, which was an Apple product, and you said you were spun off of Apple?
Yeah, we were spun off from Apple, and really the Newton, which was announced, I think it was announced in 94, that came to us out of left field because it was essentially the idea that we were trying to do, and Apple had funded General Magic and was aligned with General Magic, and then kind of out of nowhere, and the film gets into it, kind of gets stabbed in the back from Apple, where they announced that they're going to have a product that's going to compete fairly directly with what we were trying to do. And we had been very, very quiet PR-wise at that point. We had kept things under wraps because we knew that we had to have the technology sufficiently far along so that when we did PR, people would actually have something they could feel and touch and that worked and that would bring the concept to life. So all of a sudden, kind of the ground was cut out from under us when Apple, our supposed, parent and ally, announced that they're going to do something that in many ways replicated exactly what they had spun us out to do.
Interesting. Did General Magic ever produce a product, a consumer product?
General Magic didn't. General Magic was a software company. So we created an operating system called MagicCap that ran on devices that were made by Sony and Motorola and Panasonic, and Philips also were working on devices as well. So we were kind of following a Microsoft-like model of not being in the hardware business. However, I should say that General Magic created what was called a reference design. So we had a bunch of electrical engineers and chip designers who created a design that other companies would use to build their products modeled after. Then they could add different features and different functionality as they saw fit. It's a little bit like the Android model, where there's a kind of an Android kernel, as I understand it, and different phone manufacturers can kind of add to it or tweak to it as they see fit. But there's a kind of core Android software. We did the same thing we had kind of a core set of hardware that any device was going to have, and then we had the operating system that would run on those devices.
Apple, like you said, Apple pulled the rug out from under you guys. And I know the tech world can be dog eat dog and down and dirty and nasty and everything else. Is there anything to prevent that from happening now with any of the tech companies? I mean, what's changed in your view since you've seen, so many, we're going on 20 plus years of this now?
Yeah, we see this. I mean, the big thing that I think has heightened is non-disclosures and non-competes and things like that really tech companies are very aggressive about protecting their intellectual property, aggressive about making sure that key people who leave a company aren't going to go off and start something that competes. So at the end of the day, it's a cadre of lawyers, I think, more than anything, that's stopping a repeat of this. But part of what you have to remember is being spun out from Apple, the initial intellectual property that General Magic had was shared by Apple. So it wasn't something that General Magic could really put a stop to in terms of claiming that there were theft of trade secrets or things like that. And that's part of the reason it was such a bind for us once Newton was announced, because we didn't really have recourse in the traditional way. It also, getting bogged down in lawsuits when you're a startup is probably at the bottom of the list of things you want to do.
It's interesting to see, and I know that Megan Smith, who is also going to be joining you for a Q&A after the film, which incidentally is premiering here at the Annapolis Film Festival on Saturday at noon at St. John's College in their Key Auditorium. But Megan was instrumental in General Magic as well, and she has moved on. And the last I had heard, she was an MIT graduate, and she was President Obama's head of IT, or head of there was a fancy name that they give these government.
Yeah,
workers.
Chief Technology Officer. Yeah, exactly.
And where did everybody end up with General Magic from when you were there? I mean, did they go on to work for Apple or to Microsoft and whatnot, or did they?
Some people have come full circle. Kevin Lynch, who worked at General Magic, is now head of the Apple Watch at Apple. Tony Fadell, who is retired now, essentially, he was instrumental in the iPod and then the iPhone at Apple, and then he went on to create and found Nest with its family of devices, starting with the intelligent thermostat. Megan's had a long and storied career, both as CTO. She was at Google for a while. She now has a nonprofit called Shift 7, which is really about harnessing the transformational power of technology for social causes. Pierre Omidyar, maybe some people have heard of him. He was at General Magic and left to found eBay. Several other people left to found a company that is now defunct, but Web TV, which Microsoft bought in the mid to late 90s and was the first attempt to have a browser and web access on people's televisions. So there are a ton of notable successes coming out of it. Most of the people who worked at General Magic are still in the technology industry. Some are at Apple. Most are in Silicon Valley. Some are a little bit further afield from that. But for a lot of us, it was a really crushing experience because General Magic was aiming so high. I mean, we really thought we were doing something that would transform the world. And when the company failed, that was a really bitter failure for a lot of us. Fast forward 25 years and come to find out that the ideas we had were correct. The execution was flawed. But, and you'll see this in the film, Mark Peratt, the founder of General Magic in 1988, drew a sketch of a device that did not exist at that point, and he described what the device would be able to do. And he pulls out of his pocket an iPhone in the documentary, and he lays it right next to the picture, and they look essentially the same, and the functionality is essentially the same. So that's a long-winded answer to a simple question, but I think everybody at General Magic really was passionate about technology, and the vast majority of us remain that way and are still working in the technology field.
Just curious, as we see all the technology that's around here in the websites, I mean, we've got the social media, we've got Facebook, we've got Snapchats and everything else that's gone there. You mentioned eBay. Obviously, you guys had some sort of a vision on personal communications back then. Could you foresee where we are today back then?
We didn't. We foresaw that people would be connected by devices that were very personal and portable, and that there would be many ways of communicating through them, that there would be many different applications that would run on them. We foresaw software as a service, where instead of buying a piece of software, you'd have a subscription-based model. Emojis came out of General Magic. What eventually became the USB port came out of General Magic. So there was a lot of stuff that we were really right on with. And that's what makes it such a fascinating story, how this company that got so much right ended up getting so much wrong. The social network side of it was not something that we were really focused on at the company, and I don't think anybody anticipated how much it would explode, as it's done over the past decade. We thought people would be much more closely connected, but we didn't anticipate kind of the details of how people would socialize in networks in years to come.
What do you see for 10 years, 20 years from now? Do you have any crystal balls?
Not any crystal balls that are clear. They're pretty cloudy. I mean, I'm very concerned about social media. I was thinking about, in advance of this interview, there's a great book that came out in the late 70s called 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television. And in it, a guy who's a former ad executive said, TV is just a technology that trends in a certain way. It creates certain social results. And I fear very much that we're going to see a lot more problems around social media in terms of it being corrosive for our politics and corrosive for how people interact and get along with each other. So I'm not an unalloyed technology optimist. I mean, I think there will be amazing innovations in terms of devices and in terms of products and services that are going to be out there. I'm hoping the good outweighs the bad. I think that nanotechnology and biotech are new frontiers that are going to be really profound in the next 20 years. But like I said, my prognostications are worth what people listening to this podcast paid for them. So take it with a grain of salt.
That's true. And I do agree with you. I think that social media has, certainly a very sharp double-edged sword there. And it's just so beautiful that, I've been able to connect through high school, classmates that I haven't seen in decades. And we're virtually very tight, but then you look and you hear about all the different bullying that goes on there. And just most recently, the shooting down in New Zealand in Christchurch was done on Facebook Live, from what I understand, which is just an entirely different ball of wax there. And you're 100% right, from what I can see, is just the good technology that's coming out of what's being developed in the hospitals, and the way to be able to, records, and be able to transport, different things. I know, gosh, on my iPhone, I can turn around, and if I get in a car wreck, it can access what kind of blood type I have and what allergies and everything else, which is absolutely fantastic. This just blows my mind that this technology was here. This presence was to be able to sit there and look into the future, and it just didn't work.
There's a great clip in it where, and there's a ton of archival footage. I mean, General Magic had a cinematographer that was documenting the company pretty much from day one.
Well, sure, you guys were a startup. That's what they do out there, right?
Yeah, exactly. You just see a lot of remarkable footage that was filmed during the heat of the moment. And in one, Megan Smith is being interviewed showing a prototype of the device we were trying to make, and it's as big as a hardback book. I mean, it's not portable in any sense of the word. And the interviewer asks, well, how big will it be eventually? And she narrows her hands to the size of a smartphone today, and she says, eventually there'll be wristwatches like this. So it's just stunning to think that, in 1996, people saw that far ahead about what was coming down the pike. And it really is kind of the most successful failure in Silicon Valley that no one's ever heard of, because the ideas really succeeded, but the company is a case study in going out too early and all the kinds of problems that can doom a company.
It really is. I was looking at the wiki page for General Magic, and it said that you guys were rumored to have rabbits in the office. Is there truth to that?
There is truth. There's a rabbit and there was a parrot. It was a place where people were working long and hard. I mean, we used to joke that if they had laundry service, no one would ever leave, because we did have meal service for lunch and dinner. And people built bunks in their cubes. I mean, that's how hardcore the place was in terms of the work ethic. There was a bunny rabbit named Bowser, and I forget the name of the parrot. But it was a place where, hijinks were totally tolerated. I mean, there's a paint pellet gun war once between a few guys who wanted to blow off some steam. There were remote-controlled racing cars racing around the office. The engineers decided that they wanted to have a satellite TV, and on their own accord, without asking anyone's permission, they got a satellite dish on the TV back in the day when those things were, 10 feet wide, and installed a projection TV, just took over a conference room and installed a projection TV. So it was really a place that was, I don't want to say wild in a kind of hedonistic sense, but wild in terms of great creativity, great passion, great energy. And it came out, whether it was seeing a bunny hop through the hallways or people, just building crazy stuff for their own comfort or amusement.
Tech companies that you hear, the Googles and the Microsofts and the benefits and perks they have in their campuses today just make me so jealous as I sit here and look at my cat looking up at me from the floor going like, feed me. That's about the biggest perk I get here. So I'm totally jealous with that.
Oh, it's way beyond anything that we experienced at General Magic. I mean, I was visiting a former General Magic colleague at Google over the summer, and we went to have lunch. He took me to lunch, and they have, I don't know how many different restaurant choices that you can pick from different cuisines. And I said, can I buy? And he said, what are you talking about? Google buys for everybody. And I mean, these are, hundreds, if not thousands of people on that campus who are eating every day, and it's considered completely unremarkable to have perks like that, let alone the other stuff that you alluded to.
It's kind of interesting that I read an article in the New Yorker recently, and they were talking about Manhattan office buildings, and where they used to be sort of cubicle farms. You'd have a company would take over a floor and it would just be a bunch of cubicles. And now what they're finding is they can't do that because these companies won't go to buildings like that if they don't have certain amenities. So they've got they'll have a craft beer bar, they'll have a recreation room, they'll have a swimming pool in some of them, and different amenities that would be shared among many companies that might indeed build their cubicle farms. But it was kind of an interesting note on the real estate market in New York that they need to really adapt to this, because even small companies, not the Googles, not the Microsofts, not the eBays and Amazons of the world, but Billy Bob's Bait and Tackle that may have 12 franchises and this is their headquarters, they need those kind of perks too to attract the good talent.
Yeah, it's really trickled down, and it's something that's becoming more and more a must-have and an expectation of prospective employees. I mean, I remember when we got the first espresso machine at General Magic, and that was a big deal. And now if you don't have a espresso machine at a company, I wonder if someone actually, coming in for an interview is even going to take the place seriously. It's if somebody wrote it as part of a fictional comedy, you wouldn't believe it. But that's, the perks have gotten to a level that I don't think was rivaled since the .com era.
Oh my gosh, I'm sitting here silently laughing as you say somebody would turn them down because there's not an espresso machine. That's awesome. Well, I'll tell you, I'm not going to take too much more of your time, but Tom Hershenson, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. And you were the number one banana in the PR world at General Magic.
I was the number one banana. I'm dying to ask you a question of whether you actually are in front of a kitchen table and it's dirty. I listened to some back episodes of the podcast, and I'm just wondering whether...
Right now, it is not a kitchen table, but it is dirty. It was a kitchen table. It was a kitchen table at one point. Technically, I'm not in a kitchen. But
then it's not a kitchen table.
Well, it is a kitchen table.
Now we have to get into a philosophical debate about whether the location determines the table.
That's true. We've got to find out where where the punctuation sits, the commas or something. But it is a dirty table. It used to be in my kitchen. Well, hey, Tom, I am looking forward to meeting you in actually a couple days when you're here in Annapolis for the Annapolis Film Festival. It does get underway Thursday, the 21st, and runs through Sunday, the 24th. But the movie that the people that are listening to this need to see is General Magic. And it's the story about the tech company that nobody has ever heard of, but probably everybody is thankful that they existed because the technology is literally in the palm of your hands today that they developed. And that is going to be screening on Saturday at noon at St. John's at the Key Auditorium. And you can get information at AnnapolisFilmFestival.com. You can get your tickets and everything else there. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the General Magic movie, you can go to General Magic, the movie. That seems appropriate for You ought to help
It's aptly named, very straightforward, and I really encourage people to go see it. I mean, I can't be unbiased about it. I have such fondness for the company, but it's really eye-opening, and the film is funny, the film is thought-provoking, and I think people will really enjoy viewing it.
And I will point out that this is a documentary. This isn't somebody's dream of what it was. This is the real deal. And as you said, they've got tons of footage there, which is certainly unusual for most companies back in 1996.
Yeah.
And we will see Megan Smith. She'll be joining you as well for a Q&A after the screening.
Yep.
And we look forward to seeing you guys on Saturday.
Well, I look forward to being there. I really appreciate the time you've given to the interview. I hope I've had few uhs and ands, and have given answers that people actually find interesting. According to my daughters, I never do that, but
your kids will lie to you all the time. No, you didn't. Everything was great.
Well, great. Thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing folks at the screening on Saturday.
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us to learn a little bit more about the films coming to the Annapolis Film Festival. Remember, tickets and passes can be obtained at AnnapolisFilmFestival.com. This is John Fernay, and I'll see you at the movies.